This is my conviction. What is happening to it?
You know why you do it. You don't do it because you get paid well. You don't do it because men love you. You do it because you love men, and because more than that, you want to honor God.
This is Protestia Tonight.
Hello, and you are listening to Protestia Tonight for Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025. This is the program that we hope will be glorifying to God, convicting to sinners, and edifying to the saints, a program with sincere questions and biblical answers. Thank you for tuning in. This program brought to you by our patron supporters, our Protestia insiders, who support this ministry on an ongoing basis over at patreon.com/Protestia. You can join them for as little as $5.95 a month. If you head over to patreon.com/Protestia, you'll see that it is listed at $8.50 a month. All you have to do is subscribe for a year, and the discount will reduce it to $5.95. We would very much appreciate your support. It is desperately needed. The times are wicked that we live in, and particularly with the internet being what it is, social media being what it is a playground for false teaching, playground for those that claim the name of Christ and yet are not of him, and they will, if possible, drag away even the elect. And we are called to be on guard, on our toes, and being Bereans about everything, testing everything by Scripture, holding one another accountable as we are able to. And in terms of public speech and proclaiming things out in the open, that is what Protestia does. We are grateful that the ministry is a blessing to and is used by many churches around the country and the world, that pastors rely on us to, as we say in the military, sometimes watch their six, so that as they are engaging in local ministry in their local churches, they have a reliable resource to go to find out if something out there is just not right. We only have 24 hours in the day. We don't have time necessarily to know everything, and so we do rely on resources and others and those who we hold common cause with theologically, to be able to do some of this work on our behalf. That's what Protestia endeavors to do. Not a week goes by where I'm not contacted by, or we're not contacted by, in some ways, a ministry, local church pastors who are wondering, hey, my congregant brought this book to me. My congregant brought this name to me, and they said they're really blessed by this, and it's awesome, and I should read it, and all of this, and I don't have time to read the stack of books I have on my desk and do all of the theological discernment work. Have you guys seen this before? Do you know who this is? And generally speaking, the process for us goes one of two ways. Well, really kind of both things. I mean, sometimes it's like, yeah, we know who that is, and we know exactly what they teach, and we've written about them, and we have the receipts on the website. You can just do a search for their name and you're going to find this. We usually don't get calls about those kind of folks, though, because pastors and churchmen seeking to be discerning just go to the website, and they go to Protestia, they go to Pulpit and Pen, they go to Dissenter, they go to any number of good discernment websites on the interwebs, and they type the person's name in themselves and they see the receipts for themselves. They can do that pretty quickly, but sometimes it's like we haven't written about somebody. And so then they're like, okay, who is this person? Should I read this? Is this something that I can not be concerned about? Then we go on to step 2, which is, okay, who's this person? This person you've named, who are they palling around with? And usually that uncovers whether it's somebody that is a safe resource or not. Discernment by association is not a bad thing. It's actually a helpful thing. So when you find some unnamed, Christian voice on the internet, some unnamed pastor you don't know about, you go do some research, and they're teaching at the Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry or something, or they're showing up at conferences with NAR leaders or progressive evangelicals or these kinds of things. It's like, okay, we know where they're coming from. We know that that is a dangerous dangerous association, we can fairly say that person is not somebody that should be endorsed or looked past. It's somebody that should be marked and avoided simply based off of their associations. That is a safe thing to do. You never need the teachings from anybody teaching online. Anyway, I'm chasing a rabbit there, but you guys know what I'm talking about. We're grateful that this ministry is used for that purpose by faithful Christians and pastors and ministry leaders in local churches. This ministry is focused on the spiritual gift of discernment and the practice of polemics, which is argumentation over what is true and what isn't true, and the deeper things. That's what we do. We engage in polemics. It is a biblical practice, a Christian practice. The gift of discernment, discerning between spirits, is a gift given to the church. And while there are some, I would argue, who have been actually given the gift of discernment in a special and unique way, versus the rest of the members of the body, we are all, as Christians, called to practice discernment, to train the powers of our discernment through constant practice, so that we may be skilled in the word of righteousness. This is something that is called upon for all of us, and that's what we do here. The most consequential and important doctrine that we are called to be discerning about is the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is a plumb line upon which we determine who is of us and who is not, who belongs to Christ and who does not, who is claiming the name of Christ and yet is not among his flock, versus those who may be mistaken on something or are erring in a teaching, something that is in that category, and yet they're still Christians. There is a category for that as well. We do what we call doctrinal triage as we do this, but you may be listening to this asking, okay, what is the gospel? If I listen to somebody like, Christianity Today or Russell Moore or somebody like this, the gospel is all about a wide berth of things. You listen to those guys, they'll tell you, oh yeah, the gospel is about, redistribution of income and taking care of illegal immigrants, having a moral obligation to give your things to other people just because they exist. You're supposed to love your neighbor more than yourself instead of, love your neighbor as yourself, as Jesus taught. Everything's a gospel issue, those folks. And the truth is that's not the gospel. The gospel is the good news that Jesus Christ paid the price by dying a sacrificial death on the cross for the sins of the redeemed, in order to reconcile them to the Father, and then by placing your faith, hope, and trust in him, repenting of your sins, and trusting in Christ for salvation. Salvation is a free gift. You need not to go to hell, which is the bad news that the gospel answers. The good news of the gospel answers the bad news, which is that you and me and everybody else born except for Christ himself inherited a sinful nature from our federal head Adam, and that consequently we are in a position of rebelliousness and condemnation before a perfect and holy God. Only by the power of the blood of Jesus Christ on the cross can we be reconciled. The Bible teaches that Jesus was born of a virgin, lived a perfect life, earning righteousness we could not earn, and then out of his love for us, sacrificed himself on the cross, gave of his life, so that you and I and all those who believe and place their faith, open trust in him might live. We get his righteousness imputed to us, counted to us before the Father, and are seen as righteous because of the act of obedience that's imputed to us from Jesus Christ. Jesus died on that cross. He was buried. On the third day, raised by the power of the Holy Spirit, conquering death, proving his sacrifice was accepted. Ascended to the Father, where he now sits at his right hand and intercedes on behalf of his saints. Only by way of Jesus Christ can you approach the Father. Can you be saved? That's the gospel message. If you have questions about that, please reach out to me or anybody else at Protestia. We'd be happy to explain that to you. Other theological questions, other things you might have about, issues with the work that we're doing or whatever, those come on a first patron basis. because we have to prioritize in some ways. So Patreon messages are always responded to. You can also join us on Thursday night for the Insider Roundtable and interact directly, have conversations directly about the issues that concern you, questions you might have. Every one of the Insider Roundtables, we generally have topics for them, but there's also, you know, a point at which we're happy to do Q&A and answer questions that you have. You know, I usually stay late on the Insider Roundtables if folks want to keep talking about other things that weren't part of the topic for that Thursday. That's a good way to do it as well. For comments on social media, YouTube, Twitter, you know, Facebook, all that kind of thing, we don't get to those as often. And that's just because we have to prioritize. But anyway, the topic for this Protestia Tonight, I was listening to, sometimes I'm not sure why I subject myself to this stuff, but I guess it's, you know, curiosity and trying to keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on. But apparently, at the 2025 SBC annual meeting, which is coming up next month, actually in June, I guess next month is May, then the meeting's coming up in June. The worship at the business meeting, they always do musical worship, several spots of musical worship at the meeting, one before it starts or at the beginning, usually one halfway through the day, and they do that on Tuesday and Wednesday. It's being led by the worship ministry, the music ministry from Clint Presley's church, as he's the current president of the convention. That's the norm. The norm is for whoever the president of the convention is, for their church to take the lead on this. And apparently on Wednesday, it was announced Jonathan Howe, who's over at Baptist Press at the SBC, is talking to Clint Presley's worship pastor. I forgot his name off the top of my head, but basically it was announced on Wednesday they'll be leading worship at the convention with the help of worship artists Shane and Shane. Many of you are aware of Shane and Shane. The large body of their work consists of things that are, you know, pretty theologically solid, a lot of resettings of hymns, sometimes with additional chorus, sometimes just the hymn itself. You know, quite useful for churches that want to remain faithful. You know, want to sing some hymns, but you know, bring the musical stylings into the 21st century. Nothing wrong with that, of course. But some of you probably also remember that Shane and Shane were on a bill and have been on other bills as far as I know, but on a bill most notoriously in 2023 over at Red Rocks. That's here in Colorado, not too far from where I live. You know, within 10 miles of where I live, Red Rocks Amphitheater. It's a pretty legendary outdoor music venue. And in 2023, Shane and Shane were on a bill, a worship concert at Red Rocks with Bethel, with Phil Wickham, with, you know, a lot of these, you know, well-known names in Christian praise and worship music. And of course, they took a lot of heat for it, saying, "Hey, this is not. We thought you guys were different. This is not. You know, we didn't think that you would partner with heretical movements like Bethel and show up at concerts with them and so on and so forth." Shane and Shane, I don't think actually responded to this in any way. Maybe they did. I didn't see it. But it's a reminder that I'm not sure how much even Protestia readers are familiar with the underlying structure of the Christian worship industry. I mean, we used to call it the Christian, you know, Christian music industry. CCM, you know, is kind of an acronym for contemporary Christian music, and it used to actually kind of apply to you know, artists like album artists like you know, Amy Grant or Stephen Curtis Chapman or something like this, or, you know, Michael W. Smith before he kind of turned into a worship guy, who would release albums. They would release things that were similarly structured to what the secular music industry does. You know, they'll release an album, 10 to 12 songs on the album, and you go buy the album, but these songs were not intended for corporate worship. And then after the basically the decimation of the recorded music industry, as online downloads became a thing, you know, Napster showed how much easier it is to distribute music over the internet than it is to go to stores and buy albums. iTunes brought about where you can go buy singles for 99 cents or now like $1.29 or whatever they are at this point. And then with streaming services where you could just have a subscription to something like Spotify or Apple Music or YouTube Music or Tidal or Deezer or whatever you're subscribed to, Amazon Music, you basically get for a monthly fee, you get access to anything in that catalog anytime you want. Once all that came about, the actual revenue generated from sales of albums, sales of recorded music, basically disappeared for most artists. Unless you're a huge, highly popular music artist, you're not making real money on selling your recordings anymore. That's kind of gone away. And so the Christian music response to that, and Michael W. Smith's a good example of this, was to focus instead on worship music, on writing and producing and recording music intended to be used in corporate worship gatherings on Sunday. And the CCM industry, that niche of the industry, started to be dominated instead of by Newsboys or Toby Mac or whoever your Christian artist was. They started to be dominated by worship movements. So now all of a sudden the top Christian charts are Passion and Elevation and Hillsong, Bethel, these kind of groups, and the solo artists that work with them, write with them, collaborate with them, but are also, you think like, Pat Barrett or Phil Wickham, some of these guys, and, Michael W. Smith as he sort of transitioned. Obviously Chris Tomlin's probably the biggest name people know in the worship music industry. All of these artists distinctly writing songs for corporate worship rather than for as album tracks. And obviously, people can still buy albums, they can still stream it, or they can still watch videos online, or they can still consume these songs the same way that regular album tracks are consumed. But a big part of the reason that they know what the songs even are, or familiar with them or like them, is because their church is playing them on Sundays. K-Love and The Way and some of these other radio stations that play, quote unquote Christian music. Although K-Love doesn't say, hey, it's Christian. It says it's positive and encouraging. It waters it down as much as possible. It's just general positive spirituality more than it is Orthodox Christianity in any way. They play these songs too. So you'll be turning on a Christian radio station and hearing praise and worship songs, not album tracks. And that's kind of where that industry has gone, that part of the overall music industry. But there's so many more elements to this that I think regular churchgoers don't know. And I'm going to try to walk you through them, as quickly as possible. I got about, 20 minutes or so left on this Protestia Tonight, but I think we can get some of the things that you may not be aware of as a regular churchgoer or regular pew sitter, even as a pastor of a church or worship pastor. You may not be aware of some of how this works. Those of you that have been with Protestia long enough to be familiar with me know that my background, my education, my vocational experience, my area of expertise, more than at least institutionally or educationally, is not like, I don't have a theology degree, for instance. I don't have an MDiv. I don't have a DMin or anything like this. But what I do have is industry experience and a degree in the music industry. And so, when we talk about this, think things like production and contracts, booking, venues, copyright, publishing, songwriting, all these kinds of things. This is my area of education and expertise. I've been a musician my whole life, and for a long time in various professional environments. This is my something I know something about, and I can tell you, generally speaking, how the music industry has worked in the past, how it works now, the rapidity by which it changes, how fast things change. I remember finishing up my degree in 2007 and writing my thesis on what I thought the future of music distribution was going to look like. And at the time, I talked about it being, they're gonna still own their songs, but the songs won't be limited to physical mediums like CDs. Instead, they'll have them on a device or something like this, like an iPod or a Zune or something, and be able to kind of take them anywhere. And the songs will only be there. They won't have to rip them from CDs and all this. And I got that partially right. What I didn't see coming was the information technology, the internet age's growth, broadband internet and things, basically making and cell phone networks, 4G and now 5G cell phone networks, making it feasible to not own music at all, not own the rights to a recording at all, but instead to just stream them as you saw fit from somebody else's library. You basically rent the song. That's kind of where we are now. But anyway, suffice to say, I know something about this. And when we examine the Christian worship industry, I'm going to call it the worship industry because I'm going to distinguish it from songs written just for a Christian market, but instead we're going to talk about songs that are written for corporate worship in churches to be used in church worship. The industry as it sits right now is basically dominated by what we might call the big four. There are four big worship, conglomerate movements that have attached songwriters and artists with them. They also collaborate with one another sometimes. Several of them do their own publishing work. Several are signed to the Christian imprints of major record labels. When I say the big four, we're talking about Hillsong, Bethel, Passion, and Elevation Worship. Those are the big four. And there are some smaller ones that emulate these movements. But in terms of the domination of the Christian worship usage, it's those four. Now, the Christian worship industry has a sort of unique relationship with churches. Copyright law protects churches from performance copyrights for things that they perform in a religious service. So a lot of people don't know this, or they've bought into some other version of this equation. But the truth is that if your church on a Sunday morning decides it's going to perform and sing a worship song, a copyrighted worship song, it doesn't need to pay the copyright holders of that composition anything. Where your church is required to have licensing and permission to use things is in terms of reproductions of sheet music, and then the actual printing of the content of the composition, whether it's the lyrics, music, or both, in any sort of printed form or any sort of displayed form. So if you think like the screens that your church might use to throw lyrics up while you're worshiping on a Sunday morning, that's protected under copyright, and they have to have permission to do that. If they print out in your church bulletin the lyrics of a copyrighted song, they actually have to have permission to do that as well. If they reproduce the chord charts or the notation or something for musicians that are on the platform that are up front, they have to have permission to do that. Just singing the song doesn't require any sort of special permission in a religious service. And so the organization that really brought this sort of systematized this is an organization called CCLI. Many of you have heard of this before. If you're in a church and you see a little copyright disclaimer at the bottom of the first lyrics of a song on the screen, the song you're about to sing, the first lyrics pop up, you see a little copyright disclaimer at the bottom, copyright blah, 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 administered by CCLI. CCLI is the Christian Copyright Licensing International. That's what it's called. And it is an organization that churches buy subscriptions to, depending on the size of the church, depending on the attendance of the church. The subscription becomes more or less expensive depending on how many people are there. And CCLI, you pay the subscription, and then you report your church's song usage to CCLI, and they distribute royalties to the copyright holders of the songs that you're using. Now, a good portion of this is voluntary. I mean, like I was saying before, if your church is just performing a song, and they're not reproducing arrangements or printed materials, they actually don't need to. They don't need to any permission. They don't need to report. They don't need to pay royalties. Nothing like that. But CCLI gives them a blanket license for any song that is any song that's administered by CCLI. Gives them a blanket license to reproduce certain materials for that song, and it's usually things like the lyrics on the screen, maybe printed lyrics in a bulletin, chord charts and things like this. Some pretty basic stuff, as far as I know. It gives them a permission to do that however they want, as long as they are as long as they're reporting their usage. CCLI it's similar in a way, but not quite the same as what are called performing rights organizations. And a performing rights organization, a PRO, is an organization that represents songwriters, composition holders, people that own the copyrights for compositions. And by the way, the copyright for a composition is not the same as a copyright for a sound recording. They're two different things. So we're talking about the people that actually own the song. A performing rights organization is tasked with tracking and recouping royalties for the public performance of a composition. Names that you might have heard might include BMI or ASCAP. Those are the two big performing rights organizations in the world, and particularly in the United States. There are also some smaller sort of boutique PROs, but those are the two big names. If you see a notated piece of music, or even that little copyright notice on the slides at your church, you might see that the licensing of the song is administered by a certain publishing company. You might see whether they're associated with BMI or ASCAP on there. And basically what these organizations do is they enforce, to the best of their ability, the public performance of compositions and collect on behalf of the copyright holders the royalties for that performance. There's another PRO called CSAC that is European primarily, but they're starting to make inroads in the United States. That CSAC represents about 13 to 15% of artists, I believe, in the United States is about what that number is. But CSAC represents about 35% of worship songwriters, a much higher percentage of worship songwriters. And the reason this is the case, I would argue, CSAC has been pursuing worship artists to get them to be represented by CSAC rather than ASCAP or BMI, because CSAC acquired CCLI. It was back in either 2015 or 2017. CSAC buys CCLI, the Christian Copyright Licensing International. And CSAC is now owned, by the way, by Blackstone, which is a major conglomerate. Some of you are familiar with Blackstone, some of the things that they're involved in that we would not appreciate as Christian conservatives. But CSAC is basically has basically wooed a lot of these Christian songwriters that work within the Big Four ecosystem, because they have an ownership stake. They have a monetary motivation. And CSAC is a for-profit company, which means CCLI is a for-profit company, of course. Excuse me. But CCLI profits from the memberships that churches pay for. And CSAC, of course, profits from the administration of the performing rights of these songs. And so if they can have a worship artist, and name your person, let's just say Chris Tomlin. Chris Tomlin is CSAC. So CSAC is responsible for ensuring that royalties owed to Chris Tomlin on whatever he's written are accurately tabulated and collected. And of course, CCLI is the organization responsible for church reporting and tracking worship music used in churches. Now, your church doesn't have to have a CCLI license, but most churches do. Certainly, churches of the evangelical variety that do the, kind of formula you're used to, whether or not they're newer or older praise songs, they do a praise band or kind of a worship formula with newer stuff. They all have CCLI licenses, and so these artists have been pulled into CSAC by CSAC basically offering them a bigger percentage than ASCAP or BMI was willing to. And CSAC can do this because it knows it's profiting from multiple areas of this song's performance. They profit from the licenses in churches. They profit from the CSAC, of course, profits anytime one of their, as they're collecting royalties from artists, they get a piece of that puzzle. They get a piece of that royalty collection. But this relationship, this professional relationship, this corporate relationship is something that a lot of Christians don't know. They don't understand it. The third piece of this puzzle, and hopefully I'll be able to work this out in an article at some point to really describe it for you so that you'll have something to chew on, something maybe to take your worship pastor, your music minister, whoever it is, and tell them about this. But the third piece of the puzzle is that a lot of churches are using technology solutions that have cozy relationships with the CCLI, CSAC infrastructure. Some of you may have heard of the software program Planning Center. It's been around for a while now. It's a service. It's an organizational tool, a planning tool for church worship services. And so it organizes worship teams, the people that might be involved, the materials involved. It sets structure and schedule for the services themselves. It requests musicians or other people as needed on different teams to be involved in the worship service. A lot of you have seen this before. It's very popular. A lot of churches use it. My church uses it. And the other tool that you should be aware of is the display tool that's used in a lot of churches called ProPresenter. You guys have a lot of you have heard of this before. This is a software that runs the displays, multiple displays in churches, and puts up lyrics and it on the screen. It can handle video. It can handle lower thirds. So when your pastor's preaching and you want to drop a scripture reference on the screen so people can follow along. None of these are bad things, of course, in and of themselves. Planning Center is not a bad thing in and of itself. It's not bad to be organized and do things in good order. We're actually biblically commanded to do that. There's nothing wrong with a technological tool to make that easier to do per se. But what a lot of people don't know is that CCLI and CCLI's related arms. Some of you might have heard of Song Select. This is CCLI's system for getting the materials for the songs you want to use from the CCLI catalog, of course. And then worshiptogether.com, which is a publishing house, as a Christian publishing house connected to CCLI as well. What some of you may not know is that technology tools like Planning Center and ProPresenter have struck up special deals with CCLI, Song Select, worshiptogether.com, and of course, by extension, CSAC and Blackstone to make it easier to use their preferred songs and their preferred artists and feature their artists up at the top of searches, make it technologically easier to use those songs. Like Planning Center can report your CCLI automatically, but only songs that are within that ecosystem. Obviously it can't do this with independent, worship songs. When you use public domain hymns, Planning Center sometimes throws a warning message to say, hey, you might need additional licenses. All of this is designed to make churches think they need CCLI. They need Planning Center and ProPresenter to be integrated. And ProPresenter, by the way, does the same thing, where it makes it very convenient to automatically import and set up songs that are within the CCLI Worship Together CSAC infrastructure. They prioritize these things. And so you wind up with a feedback loop where, okay, the reporting, CCLI convinces churches you have to have CCLI. You have to report. This is the way to keep from getting in trouble with copyright, which is, super unlikely anyway. But even if you say, hey, we want to shoot a few bucks back to the songwriters for what we're using in church, there's nothing wrong with that particularly. But CCLI has been very good about convincing churches, you have to have this. Like you really can't do church worship without CCLI. And then they market and encourage you to use technological tools, then make it easier to use CCLI songs. Those tools recommend CCLI, CSAC artists, and those artists wind up climbing the charts. The royalties paid for the same CCLI reporting for a CSAC artist versus a ASCAP or BMI artist is much higher for the CSAC artist. So the artists themselves, the songwriters themselves, are encouraged to get into the same feedback loop. They write, they promote, they cross-write and cross-promote one another, all to increase the inevitability of the automatic assumption that this is what's available that's out there. Churches play the stuff. It gets even more popular. It climbs the charts. It's recommended by the technology tools. And so more churches play it. Working outside of that ecosystem with independently written stuff, or songwriters that don't work within that ecosystem is much, much harder, much more difficult, takes a lot more time. And again, it's juxtaposed with the claim, or at least the implication that your church must be involved with CCLI in order to not violate copyright in some way. Technology tools like Planning Center have been caught via email and internal memos and things like this, basically saying, hey, make it take longer, like literally write the algorithm so that it takes longer to import and manage the assets for non CCLI songs. Pro Presenter is kind of the same way, because if you use that displayed software in your church and you want to put something in that's not CCLI, you have to manually input all the lyrics and the slides and things. You have to do a lot of work. Where if you just like, oh, okay, I'm going to pick the latest Phil Wickham tune instead, and you've connected your CCLI account, your Song Select account, you can just automatically bring that stuff in to the software, and you save tons of time. So these products are all interconnected in a way that I think a lot of churches don't get how much the worship industry is steered in their direction. But it's worth knowing about, because we know that a lot of these big four worship movements, a lot of the songs that they write, not only of the theological associations who are highly suspect, but the music itself sneaks in watered down and or false doctrine. It waters the whole thing down. It's pragmatic, so it's convenient, it's easy. People seem to like the stuff. They're fed the stuff in churches and on radio, and within the worship pastors are fed this stuff within the tools of the industry, and we don't really understand what's going on behind it until we actually take a look and see how this is being done, and understand that the worship music being brought into most churches is not the product of organic, pastor-led, pastor-driven theology applied to musical corporate worship. It's being fed by a corporate machine. That's the truth. So, like I said, I'll try to work this out, hopefully in an article at some point, so you have the information or the receipts, and you can go do some of the, you can check my work, so to speak. But suffice it to say, the worship industry is a corporate for-profit machine in a way that people just, regular pew sitters, regular faithful churchgoers, faithful pastors just don't understand. I hope some of this discussion has been helpful to you. Obviously, I can't get into all of the details on a less than an hour Protestia Tonight about exactly how copyright and all the music industry works. Frankly, that's probably deeper than you need to know to understand this issue. You can do some of that research yourself if you're curious about how how copyright works and how songwriting versus publishing versus sound recording and all of that works. But suffice to say, there's a reason that churches use the songs that they do, and they are in a closed loop ecosystem, many churches, that it revolves around CCLI, CSAC, major publishing and record label agreements, and the technological tools they use are funneling them back into the system. Anyway, thank you for joining me for this Protestia Tonight for Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025. Stay tuned to Protestia for all of your latest in Christian polemics and discernment news. Talk to you again real soon. As always, Semper Reformanda.